The military history of Somalia encompasses the major conventional wars, conflicts and skirmishes involving the historic empires, kingdoms and sultanates in the territory of present-day Somalia, through to modern times. It also covers the martial traditions, military architecture and hardware employed by Somali armies and their opponents. Ancient sources refer to a major military alliance between the Kingdom of Kush and one of its allies, the Kingdom of Punt, against the armies of ancient Egypt. In the early Middle Ages, the Ajuran Sultanate expanded its territories and established its hegemonic rule through a skillful combination of warfare, trade linkages and alliances, and fought the Portuguese in the Indian Ocean. The Kingdom of Ifat successfully conquered the Kingdom of Shela in the same time period. 100 years later, a major conventional war would commence during the conquest of Abyssinia, pitching the Kingdom of Adil, allied by the Ottoman Empire, against the Solomonic dynasty supported by the Portuguese Empire. The conflict is the earliest example of cannon and matchlock warfare on the continent. The early modern period saw the rise and fall of the Gaboon Dynasty, a southern military power that successfully subdued the Badera militants and forced the Omanis to pay tribute. This period also saw an increased focus by global empires on colonial expansion. The three major imperial powers of Britain, Italy and France consequently sought and signed various protectorate treaties with the ruling Somali sultans, such as Muhammad Ali Shah of the Wasang Ali Sultanate, Osman Mahmud of the Majeerteen Sultanate and Yusuf Ali Kenadid of the Sultanate of Hobyo. Supplied with military hardware by the European powers, the Ethiopian Empire also sought to expand its own influence in the Horn region. These competing influences gave birth to the Dervish state, a polity established by the religious leader Muhammad Abdullah Hassan. The Dervish forces successfully repulsed the British Empire in 4 military expeditions and forced it to retreat to the coastal region, remaining independent throughout World War I. After a quarter of a century of holding the British at bay, the Dervishes were finally defeated in 1920. When Britain for the first time in Africa used airplanes to bomb the Dervish capital of Talair. World War II saw many Somali men join British, Italian and local Somali forces during the Second Italo-Abyssinian War, the East African Campaign and the Pacific War. After independence, the Somali Republic adopted an irredentist foreign policy with the intention to reconstruct the pre-colonial borders and establish an all-encompassing Greater Somalia. This culminated in several conventional wars and border skirmishes in the form of the 1964 Border War, the Shifta War, the Ogaden War, the Ramu Incident, and the 1982 Border War, which pitched the Somali military against other forces. The fallout from these various conflicts also forged new partnerships. By the end of the 1980s, Somalia's initial friendship with the Soviet Union and subsequent partnership with the United States enabled it to build the largest army on the continent. The armed forces largely disbanded with the onset of the Civil War in the early 1990s. But were later gradually reconstituted in the 2000s with the establishment of the transitional federal government. Ancient and medieval. Ancient Somalia in the northern Dumbarton region of Somalia. A depiction of a man on a horse is postulated as being one of the earliest known examples of a mounted huntsman. A 17th century BC text found in a tomb in El Kab, belonging to the local governor, Sobernak II, mentions a huge attack from the south on El Kab in ancient Egypt by the Kingdom of Kush and its allies from the land of Punt. In ancient times, Somalia was known to the Chinese as the country of Pai Palo, which had 4 departmental cities, each trying to gain the supremacy over the other. It had 20,000 troops between them, who wore cuirasses, a protective body armor. Ifat Solomonic wars in the early Middle Ages. The Muslim and Christian kingdoms of modern Somalia and Ethiopia enjoyed friendly relations for centuries. The conquest of Shewa by the Ifat Sultanate ignited a rivalry for supremacy between the Christian Solomonids and the Muslim Ifatites, which resulted in several devastating wars. After the wars, the reigning king had his minstrels compose a song praising his victory, which contains the first written record of the word Somali. Saad ad-Din I's family was subsequently given safe haven at the court of the king of Yemen, where his sons regrouped and planned their revenge on the Solomonids. The oldest son Sabr ad-Din II built a new capital eastwards of Zila known as Dhaka and began referring to himself as the king of Adal. He continued the war against the Solomonic Empire. Despite his army's smaller size, he was able to defeat the Solomonids at the battles of Sarjan and Zikr Amhara and consequently pillaged the surrounding areas. Many similar battles were fought between the Adalites and the Solomonids, with both sides achieving victory and suffering defeat, but ultimately Sultan Sabr ad-Din II successfully managed to drive the Solomonic army out of Adal territory. He died a natural death and was succeeded by his brother Mansur ad-Din, who invaded the capital and royal seat of the Solomonic Empire and drove Emperor Daurat II to Yedia, where, according to al-Makrizi, Sultan Mansur destroyed a Solomonic army and killed the emperor. He then advanced to the mountains of Mocha, where he encountered a 30,000-strong Solomonic army. The Adalite soldiers surrounded their enemies and for 2 months besieged the trapped Solomonic soldiers until a truce was declared in Mansur's favor. Later on in the campaign, the Adalites were struck by a catastrophe when Sultan Mansur and his brother Muhammad were captured in battle by the Solomonids. Mansur was immediately succeeded by the youngest brother of the family, Jamal ad-Din II. Sultan Jamal reorganized the army into a formidable force and defeated the Solomonic armies at Baal, Yedia and Jazia. Emperor Yeshak responded by gathering a large army and invaded the cities of Yedia and Jazia, but was repulsed by the soldiers of Jamal. Following this success, Jamal organized another successful attack against the Solomonic forces and inflicted heavy casualties in what was reportedly the largest Adalite army ever fielded. As a result, Yeshak was forced to withdraw towards the Blue Nile over the next 5 months, while Jamal ad-Din's forces pursued them and looted much gold on the way, although no engagement ensued. After returning home, Jamal sent his brother armored with the Christian battle expert Harb Jaush to successfully attack the province of Dawiro. Despite his losses, Emperor Yeshak was still able to continue field armies against Jamal. Sultan Jamal continued to advance further into the Abyssinian heartland. However, Jamal, upon hearing of Yeshak's plan to send several large armies to attack 3 different areas of Adal, including the capital, returned to Adal, where he fought the Solomonic forces at Harjay, and according to al-Makrizi, this is where the Emperor Yeshak died in battle. The young Sultan Jamal ad-Din II at the end of his reign had outperformed his brothers and forefathers in the war arena and became the most successful ruler of Adal to date. Within a few years, however, Jamal was assassinated by either disloyal friends or cousins around 1432 or 1433, and was succeeded by his brother Badli ibn Saad ad-Din. Sultan Badli continued the campaigns of his younger brother and began several successful expeditions against the Christian Empire. He recovered the kingdom of Bali and began preparations of a major Adalite offensive into the Ethiopian highlands. He successfully collected funding from surrounding Muslim kingdoms as far away as the Sultanate of Mogadishu. These ambitious plans, however, were thrown out the war chamber when King Badli died during the invasion of Dawiro. He was succeeded by his son Muhammad ibn Badli, who sent envoys to the Sultan of Mamluk Egypt to gather support and arms in the continuing war against the Christian Empire. The Adalite ruler Muhammad and the Solomonic ruler Baidamayim agreed to a truce, and both states in the following decades saw an unprecedented period of peace and stability. Conquest of Abyssinia. Sultan Muhammad was succeeded by his son Shams ad-Din, while Emperor Baidamayam was succeeded by his son Eskonder. During this time period, warfare broke out again between the two states, and Emperor Eskonder invaded Dhaka, where he was stopped by a large Adalite army who destroyed the Solomonic army to such an extent that no further expeditions were carried out for the remaining of Esconder's reign. Adil, however, continued to raid the Christian Empire unabated under the General Mahfuz, the leader of the Adalite war machine, who annually invaded the Christian territories. Eskonder was succeeded by Emperor Anaod, who tried to defend the Christians from General Mahfuz, but he too was also killed in battle by the Adalite army in Ifat. At the turn of the 15th to 16th centuries, Adil regrouped in around 1527 under the charismatic leadership of Imam Ahmad ibn Ibrahim al-Ghazi. Adil invaded Ethiopia. Adalite armies with Ottoman support and arms marched into Ethiopia and caused considerable damage on the highland state. Many historic churches, manuscripts and settlements were looted and burned during the campaigns. Adil's use of firearms, still only rarely used in Ethiopia, allowed the conquest of well over half of Ethiopia, reaching as far north as Tigray. The complete conquest of Ethiopia was averted by the timely arrival of a Portuguese expedition led by Cristóvão da Gama, son of the famed navigator Vasco da Gama. The Portuguese had been in the area earlier in early 16th centuries, and although a diplomatic mission from Portugal, led by Rodrigo de Lima, had failed to improve relations between the countries, they responded to the Ethiopian pleas for help and sent a military expedition to their fellow Christians. A Portuguese fleet under the command of Estevão da Gama was sent from India and arrived at Massawa in February 1541. Here he received an ambassador from the emperor beseeching him to send help against the Muslims, and in July following a force of 400 musketeers, under the command of Cristóvão da Gama, a younger brother of the admiral, marched into the interior, and being joined by Ethiopian troops they were at first successful against the Muslims, but they were subsequently defeated at the Battle of Wofla, and their commander captured and executed. On February 21, 1543, however, a joint Portuguese-Ethiopian force defeated the Muslim army at the Battle of Wayna Daga, in which Ahmed Guri was killed. Ahmed Guri's widow married his nephew Nur ibn Mujahid, in return for his promise to avenge Ahmed's death, who succeeded Ahmed Guri, and continued hostilities against his northern adversaries until he killed the Ethiopian emperor in his second invasion of Ethiopia. During Portuguese War, the European Age of Discovery brought Europe's then superpower, the Portuguese Empire, to the coast of East Africa, which at the time enjoyed a flourishing trade with foreign nations. The wealthy southeastern city-states of Kilwa, Mombasa, Malindi, Pate and Lamu were all systematically sacked and plundered by the Portuguese. Tristão da Cunha then set his eyes on Ajuran territory, where the Battle of Barawa was fought. After a long period of engagement, the Portuguese soldiers burned the city and looted it. However, fierce resistance by the local population and soldiers resulted in the Portuguese's failure to permanently occupy the city, and the inhabitants who had fled to the interior would eventually return and rebuild the city. After Barawa, Tristão would set sail for Mogadishu, which was the richest city on the East African coast. But word had spread of what had happened in Barawa, and a large troop mobilization had taken place. Many horsemen, soldiers and battleships in defense positions were now guarding the city. Nevertheless, Tristão still opted to storm and attempt to conquer in the city, although every officer and soldier in his army opposed this, fearing certain defeat if they were to engage their opponents in battle. Tristão heeded their advice and sailed for Socotra instead. Over the next several decades, Somali-Portuguese tensions would remain high, and the increased contact between Somali sailors and Ottoman corsairs worried the Portuguese, who sent a punitive expedition against Mogadishu under João Sepulveda, which was unsuccessful. Ottoman-Somali cooperation against the Portuguese in the Indian Ocean reached a high point in the 1580s when Ajuran clients of the Somali coastal cities began to sympathize with the Arabs and Swahilis under Portuguese rule and sent an envoy to the Turkish corsair Mir Ali Bey for a joint expedition against the Portuguese. He agreed and was joined by a Somali fleet, which began attacking Portuguese colonies in Southeast Africa. The Somali-Ottoman offensive managed to drive out the Portuguese from several important cities such as Pate, Mombasa and Kilwa. However, the Portuguese governor sent envoys to India requesting a large Portuguese fleet. This request was answered and it reversed the previous offensive of the Muslims into one of defense. The Portuguese Armada managed to retake most of the lost cities and began punishing their leaders, but they refrained from attacking Mogadishu. Throughout the 16th and 17th century, successive Somali sultans defied the Portuguese economic monopoly in the Indian Ocean by employing a new coinage, which followed the Ottoman pattern, thus proclaiming an attitude of economic independence in regard to the Portuguese.